discipleship and its relations to the problem of schizophrenia. As we slowly become, first of all, probationary disciples and then later accepted disciples, we become more and more aware of how delicate an organism we are, how sensitively balanced we are. Physiologically, that is in the physical body, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually as well. At a physical level, of course, we learn to maintain balance in the body. But what is good for the physical is also applicable to the astral or the emotional, and to the mental, and to the spiritual. Our bodies contain very delicate mechanisms which balance many, many things in a process which is called homeostasis. Homeostasis. For instance, we have blood sugar. The amount of sugar at any time in the blood tends to be kept at a reasonably stable level. Sometimes this is upset, and we produce an excessively high blood sugar associated with diabetes, and some spills out in the urine. Sometimes the blood sugar drops excessively, where we have sensitive individuals with a vagus nerve and parasympathetic system, which is the target of such sensitivity. We have a body heat that tends to remain at an even level, about 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And when we get a little hotter than that temperature, we begin to sweat, which cools us down. We have mechanisms in the body for maintaining body heat, the level of body fluids, the level of metabolites in the body, blood calcium, and so on. And the nervous system and the endocrine system keep us happy and in good relationship with our environment, so that we never feel excessively hot or never feel excessively acid in our behavior, as it were. But when we begin to tread the path, this sensitivity is greatly increased. Moreover, the sensitivity is impacted from a completely different world altogether. Average man hardly registers anything from the inner world. But when we begin to tread the path, we become conscious of impacts from the inner world. One man in a successful meditation can in 2 or 3 seconds have inner experiences which might not have been his over a period of 30 lives. Yet when he treads the path, he can receive those experiences in a matter of 2 or 3 seconds in deep meditation. Of course, these experiences affect him profoundly. Spiritually, yes, but even mentally, emotionally, and even they work down into the physical body themselves. And so, man on the path is impacted from within and from without. We depict this very clearly in the great symbol of the caduceus, the entwined snakes. Whether we are Westerners and call it the caduceus, or whether we call it Ida, Sushumna, and Pingala, nevertheless, it applies. Here we have impact from without, heat from without, light from without, magnetism from without, even electricity. In my new book, Esoteric Healing, deals with the whole subject of 100 years of effect of electricity on man's body. For the first time in the history of this planet, the effect of electricity on man's body has been described. I'm going to have that cooler off, I'm sorry. Will somebody organize it? I'm not going to compete with it. And this is but one aspect of man's incredibly sensitive nature, his ability to act through the sympathetic nervous system, and so we'll put that in violet here, to react through the sympathetic nervous system, particularly to impacts from without. Heat, sweat, light, pupils, constrict. What is that? Heat, like magnetism, unknown, electricity, all sorts of things, one including effect on blood sugar. And so man reacts to his outer environment. But he also reacts, of course, to his inner environment. His inner environment. And the sympathetic nervous system here is that which we call the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic for the outer world, the parasympathetic mainly for the inner world. And all the time, between the two, there is balance very delicately, is consciousness. When man treads the path, this is an aspect, delicate balance, which becomes far more sensitized than ever before. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, man treads the path He courts stress. He looks for it. He looks for it because he performs three functions as he treads the path. If he will tread the path healthily, three functions. He serves mankind, and that brings him in confrontation with stress. He studies the occult classics, learning to focus his mind increasingly and put it under the hegemony of his spiritual nature. And he meditates. And all these, even the acts of trying to obtain an hour for meditation a day, involve him in stress. And stress is healthy. No flower without a bud. No bud without a calyx. No calyx without it being broken to allow the bloom to emerge. Stress in the tip of the bud. And man on the path courts stress. And his delicate mechanisms are constantly put into imbalance by spiritual impacts from within and by impacts from without. Many of you will have noticed that you can't stand the heat like you used to. And it's not because you're older. Very frequently older people can. You can't stand light like you used to be able to. And we foolishly begin to wear sunglasses long before it's necessary. I can't help telling you how important it is not to wear sunglasses unless it is prescribed for you. Sunglasses veil, as it were, the amount of light and heat there is, with the result that the body doesn't know how to react to a bright light situation. The eyes are dimmed, and yet the body is exposed to light. Very, very foolish to wear sunglasses excessively, or even at all if you can do without them. I never use them. And on the path, courts stress. And the stress grows constantly as he becomes accepted disciple and takes on something of the burden of the planetary karma. Not just keeping his own head above water, but sharing something of the burden of the planet's problems. Very, very frequently we find, and how lucky this is, that stress produces spiritual experience. We are taught to court it, to court stress. But ladies and gentlemen, the schizophrenic is unable to stand strong stress. This is the pity of the schizophrenic. This is why very, very frequently he is linked to discipleship, to the symptoms that we experienced in discipleship. Schizophrenic cannot stand stress. And you should always recognize this. And be careful when you are giving spiritual advice to a person that you don't add to his stress conditions. It's so easy to say, oh, you should be meditating, you should be studying, you should be more attentive to your spiritual discipline. But if you are loading a schizophrenic with excessive burdens of this sort, he may be precipitated into the very thing that you would like to save him from. So you should know about schizophrenia. I am shocked that more spiritual leaders are not here today to listen to the subject, not because of an ego point of view, but because they should be concerned with it. They should begin to be able to recognize when a person is in a state of divine unrest or whether he is manifesting schizophrenic symptoms, the one who sits in front of him and asks for spiritual counsel. Stress, yes, more than this. We know that stress very frequently produces creativeness. It is not the artist who sits in wealth and splendor and comfort who produces the greatest work. It is when he is under stress, living in a garret, when he is absolutely pressed in all directions, it is he that produces the most creative experiences in his life. And that's strange because schizophrenics are the same. Before the bout of schizophrenia comes, they very, very frequently are highly creative as they are never in other times, as a Dostoevsky could tell you, and many others. And so we begin to understand that there are many similarities to the experiences that we have as we tread the path and the experiences of a schizophrenic who cannot stand stress. Creativity is enhanced in moments of stress in man on the path. Creativity is characteristic frequently of a schizophrenia about to manifest a condition of psychosis. Always remember that schizophrenics are very, very rarely below average in IQ. They're not fools. They're not fools. In fact, their IQ is generally higher than the average population. We always liken this to the natural characteristic of mankind, to be best at the moment of crisis. This is a characteristic of Great Britain herself. It's a characteristic of the United States, to be best at a crisis. And the fourth ray mentality is one that progresses and grows through crisis. We call it harmony through conflict. And the moment that he harmonizes and derives, as it were, a harmony out of his conditions, then another crisis presents itself to him. And all the time his consciousness is growing upwards and upwards. And we live, as it were, for many of us, fourth ray minds, we live by crisis, from crisis to crisis. And all the time the human mind is growing. So there are many characteristics of normal spiritual development which, as it were, edge a person, if he has the predisposition to schizophrenia, into that condition. We are taught also, as we tread the path, we are taught that a shift of polarity of consciousness is required of us. Don't think that you can work with masters if you are a person that deals with every problem on the emotional plane, on the astral plane. They can't reach you. They're not going to come down into the astral world to answer your questions. You must learn, as you tread the path, to deal increasingly with all problems at a purely mental level. Spiritual, certainly, but at a mental level and no lower. The old procedure of not being able to deal with a problem unless you're emotionally involved must stop. I insist on this rule in my own ashram. We abhor any emotional expression which is lacking in control. Emotions, yes, but disciplined. There's a big difference between those two, emotional discipline and mental polarity. Those are the things you should write down for discipleship. You are not free to serve a master unless you are capable of these two simple things, emotional discipline and mental polarity. Now, this mental increasing practicing of mental polarity means that you are putting a greater load on your central nervous system. You are becoming more mental rather than emotional. Instead of depending on your sympathetic nervous system to produce energy for you, you are taking problems to the mental level, and the central nervous system is going to deal with it. Your mental body, as we call it. And it means that you are creating more electrical activity in your aura. And electrical activity is a very necessary part of discipleship. And as we become more sensitive to this electrical activity, increase of it, we become aware of an increase in electrical sensations in the body. This is exactly what schizophrenia most often produces. Sensations of electrical activity. In fact, we have a whole set of signposts on the path, as we call it, many of which are, as it were, electrical in nature. A person is rapidly treading the path. He's becoming a disciple, making himself available to an ashram. When he now, for instance, in a moment of stress, sneezes or coughs, he is aware of a blaze of light in his head. He has taken a deep breath and practiced for a moment Kumbhaka, the yoga breathing exercise of Kumbhaka. He has held his breath and squeezed the chest, as it were. And in that moment, the stimulation of the vagus nerve gives him a blaze of light in his head. This is a sort of an electrical phenomenon that the disciple begins to experience. But it is a characteristic, more sustained than that, of symptoms of schizophrenia. He begins to hear things that he couldn't hear before. In a state of epilepsy, he tastes and hears and is aware of things that he wasn't aware of before. He suddenly is aware, for instance, of the brain's activity, is aware of beta rhythm, alpha rhythm, and even theta rhythm. He begins literally to hear such things. When I go into epilepsy, into a state of relaxation, I very frequently hear my masseter muscle, the muscle that links the upper jaw to the lower jaw in chewing, the masseter muscle, is one of the last to relax in the body. And if you are already in a state of epilepsy with increased sensitivity and sensory perception, you sometimes hear the masseter muscle firing. Pop, 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 pop. The little muscle neurons are firing, and then suddenly it stops, and the jaw sags, as it were, the last muscle to relax. And you hear this, for sensitivity is increased. You begin to see auras, a characteristic which is brought to us sometimes abnormally in that condition known as migraine. An aura seen is a preliminary to a migraine experience. On the path, we tend, in a meditative way of life, to retain salt. And we always advise a person who's going to spend a weekend of withdrawal and meditation to cut down on the amount of salt he eats during that period of meditation, because of pituitary activity and other endocrinal functions in the region of the suprarenal glands above the kidney. we tend to retain salt, and therefore we shouldn't eat it during a period of intense meditation. That can be qualified as to whether we suffer from Addison's disease or hypoadrenalinism. But generally speaking, we tend to retain salt. Quite frequently, as the Ajna chakra opens, there is a rapid and sudden and often transient increase in blood pressure. This may be sometimes noted in the face of an individual who has gone into deep meditation. If you look at my face after I've come out of a deep meditation, it is flushed, absolutely red and flushed, because certain aspects of the Ajna center cause a relaxation of the blood vessels in the head region, and they become abnormally dilated. And so there are changes in one's physiology as well as spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, which are often very characteristic of mental disorder like schizophrenia, which is a rank psychosis, especially the hearing of voices, especially the hearing of voices. We are taught on the path to learn to listen for the voice of the silence, the voice of the silence, the voice of the master. Madame Blavatsky, who used to wear a shawl in public, and she used to draw the shawl over her head and withdraw for a moment, listening for some injunction from the master. And the voice is heard quite clearly on the tympanum or eardrum of the ear. And it is a very real voice, ladies and gentlemen. But this is the most frequent, common characteristic of schizophrenia, the hearing of voices that seem to be within him, admonishing him, encouraging him, cajoling him, swearing at him, so on. In the man that treads the path, there is an accentuation of his dream life. Dreams become prominent. All subjective experiences become prominent. He is invited to make them prominent because he is invited to record them. Because one of the processes of treading the path is to learn to discriminate the real from the unreal. And how are you to discriminate these when you are presented with nothing from within? Learn to discriminate in our dream life, in our visions, in our meditations, that which is real and unreal. But for the schizophrenic, this is similar. He has to be, as it were, constantly aware that his subjective life is becoming more and more intense. And in fact, he cannot avoid it. It becomes so intense. For him, there is a much bigger problem of discriminating what is real and what is unreal. We learn to, as it were, observe symbols in meditation. The schizophrenic is often confronted with symbols in almost every aspect of his subjective life. As we tread the path, we learn to think in categories. We learn to think in categories. I am a novice in this respect. I have to mix with beings as high above me as I am above an animal almost every night of my life. Beings who think in categories. Whilst I can still only think in single thoughts most of the time, and rarely in categories, increasingly in categories. Very frequently the schizophrenic is confronted with categories of thought. You'll see what I mean in a few minutes. We learn, as it were, to sleep lightly as we tread the path, so that there is an increase in the twilight state between waking and sleeping, and between sleeping and waking. As Paul Brunton said, learn to increase the space between sleeping and waking, whether it is going to sleep or waking up. And this, again, is something of importance to remember. We become so sensitive, so light in our sleep, that the last thoughts in our mind tend to affect our dream life. We use this in the occult. We can put questions to the master as we go to sleep, as I did for many years, and get the answer in the waking dream. Yes, we caught all this. We learn to burn incense in our bedroom or in our meditation chamber. And quite often the quality of our subjective experiences in dream or meditation is affected by the outer world's incense, or by the weight of blankets on our bed, or by the heat or coolness of the room. We may even be affected by such factors as the last time we had sex, the amount of seminal fluid stored in the seminal vesicle. All these factors affect the life of the sensitive individual. What then of schizophrenia? Some of us estimate that about 30% of the population is susceptible to psychotic symptoms, experiences that parallel those of schizophrenia. We know that it is an inherited disposition. Browning says this is true. An inherited disposition to suffer from psychological upset. It's inherited. It may not show itself, but if that person is subjected to incessant stress or bouts of stress, then that predisposition to psychological upsets will show itself. And stress brings them to the surface. Many people are latent schizophrenics, and only stress will bring the experiences to the surface. And what is more, any weakness in one of the vehicles of the lower triad will bring it out more than ever. A weakness in the physical body, a weakness in the astral body or the mental body will bring out this predisposition to mental disorder, which we call, or used to call, dementia precox, because it was characteristic of young people. Many people suffer schizophrenia all their lives, and gradually it wears off in old age. So it was once called the disease of the mind associated with a young, dementia precox. We know many things esoterically about it, and some of them corroborate what is known scientifically. We know this, that energy is required in order to hold the vehicles of the lower triad together. If you wish to be an integrated personality, acting as a composite individual, then your physical body must have available to it, as the astral must also, energy to hold the vehicles together. When we go to sleep at night, that energy is diminished. And through lack of that energy, the astral body goes out of alignment. When we have sufficient energy available, the astral body is held in alignment with the physical, and energy binds them together. Now, in the schizophrenic, the energies which hold the vehicles together are the lower triad, the physical body, the astral, and the mental body. The energies that hold them together are mobile, highly mobile. It's not that they're not there. They are there. There is, in fact, an increase of them. But instead of them being used to bind the person into a stability of bodies, it becomes labile. It is movable. That is a problem of schizophrenia. And more than this, the energy that would normally hold the bodies together to become a stable personality, the energy now mobile forms reservoirs, and under the occult maxim of energy follows thought, that energy can dramatize a thought in the schizophrenic, can dramatize an emotional concept in him. And this is why the schizophrenic is always at risk. He has tremendous psychic energy available to him, and that psychic energy can dramatize a situation in his mind. He can one moment be thinking of how he is, for instance, a football player. He would like to be a football player. He has this energy available to him. Energy follows thought. The thought of being a football player, and the next moment he is the football player. And no injunction from the outer world is going to put him off this dramatization of himself. The whole visual experience of being a football player is energized by the energy that is normally used to hold his bodies together. Now, these points are profoundly important. We all have these experiences ourselves, sometimes under control. We all live within our dramatic eyes, egos, if you like, don't we? Every day of our lives, yes, we do. How often are we not aware that we are a different person from moment to moment during the day? We are constantly splitting ourselves and saying, I am lonely, I am weary, I am hungry, I am sexy. And in each occasion, when we are hungry, we are a different personality from when we are satiated. When we are lonely, we are different from when we are surrounded with friends. When we have money in the bank, we are more confident than when we have nothing. We tend to live in different personalities. If we are a school teacher, there is the I that we tend to present to the school children in our class. But it's a very, very different I from the one that we adopt when we go into the bank manager to ask for a loan. Very, very different indeed. And it's very different from the personality that we adopt in relation to our wives and our children. We tend to live in different personalities. That's unimportant to us. But to the schizophrenic with a tremendous amount of psychic energy available, he not only becomes an I, a fragment of his personality, but he becomes the dramatic center of that whole personality, and he acts it out. And that's very, very difficult for them. In fact, if one personality that he is taking a part in, like you might do, becomes hostile, the environment is hostile to it, he might just say, I don't want to stay in that personality any longer. I'm going into that other nice one that I know of. And he will shift into it. And he'll have the energy to dramatize himself in the center of that scene of a different personality and stay there. I asked the Master Robert Browning to give me a vision, an experience, a visual experience to illustrate what this meant. And in my book, Esoteric Healing, I have had to suffer, and that's the only way the book could be written, and it's only the first part of 7. I had to experience the disease conditions that I have described there. And I had to experience schizophrenia in its various forms in my research work. And this is often done by researchers into esoteric healing. As the physician Bach, B-A-C-H, who produced the flower remedies, he had himself to experience all disease conditions which flower remedies would heal. And he wrote details as to what conditions a certain flower would heal. And I've had to do this in the same way. When I asked Browning to give me a visual experience to show how a schizophrenic may shift from one personality to another, he took me back into the earlier part of my life when I was in a tank battle in North Africa. I'm in a tank battle, and this was the experience that I had to illustrate it. You're in a tank battle. Your own vehicle, your own tank, becomes a main target for attack. Shot after shot pounds the hull of the tank. One penetrates and kills the crew in front of your eyes. The enemy are closing in. Another shot sets the tank ablaze. There is fire everywhere. You peer through the periscope of the tank at the battle outside. You note the green trees of the forest nearby. There's no other recourse. You must flee. You hurl open the turret. You dash for cover from that blazing inferno. Now you are free amongst the trees. Here you may lie in cool comfort and watch the denizens of the forest, the chipmunks at play. Perhaps you look closely, and there are elves beneath those mushroom stools. The tank battle seems far away because you are an elf, and you have things to do as an elf. This is true of these individuals in their everyday life, and to them it is a reality. Let us give you an example of how this works. The schizophrenic is subjected to stress in his own home, perhaps. His parents are unkind to him. They can't understand why he can't keep his job, why he doesn't finish his studies, why he doesn't do this, why he doesn't do that. He's under attack. He may be reading a book. He's reading a book about a Roman general, a general who is having a triumph in Rome. It fires his imagination. Energy, that psychic, labile, mobile energy that he's got, suddenly flows into the whole scene. He becomes the Roman general. He's in this great triumph in Rome. And there are crowds of people on either side of him. As he walks down the garden path, they're shouting to him, praising him. He is the general, and he must keep a stern eye whilst people observe him. He has the laurel wreath on his brow. A gardener at a distance perhaps waves to him and says, "Hello there." He turns on him, because he is a general, a Roman general, and says, "Sir, how dare you address me in such a fashion?" He is the general. And as he walks down the garden path, perhaps some bough of a tree brushes against his brow, and he thinks, a palm tree, palm leaves, yes. And suddenly the crowd stops shouting in the way they did before, and they start to address him and say, "Christ, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest." And he's back in Jerusalem. Now he's the Christ. And he must do something for these people who are praising him and calling to him. He's going to have a word with Pilate about them, Pontius Pilate, and all his nasty innuendos and hints about him not being the Messiah. Pontius Pilate. And the next moment, he is, as it were, acting out the whole scene that occurred there in those ancient days, and which is vivid in his mind. And if Pilate sneers at him, maybe he suddenly thinks of the Duke of Wellington, and somebody who threatened the Duke of Wellington to publish his love letters. And the Duke of Wellington thought to himself and then said, "Publish and be damned." And now he is the Duke of Wellington. Publish and be damned. And now the garden hedges suddenly become the serried ranks of the British troops at Waterloo. And he must present a brave face to these troops. He must not see that he's worried about whether Marshal Blucher is going to arrive on the battlefield in time. And so it goes on. This is schizophrenia, where there is excessive nervous energy, it is called, but in many respects it is psychic energy that energizes that makes him the dramatic center of every scene that he thinks himself part of. We can't always get this from a schizophrenic, but we can find it when they write down their thoughts and their experiences. And there are many famous examples of it. But before we consider a disorder of thought, let's see how the disorder of thought is energized by surrounding conditions. Let's consider a typical sort of experience of a schizophrenic with a disorder of thought, because you will find that many of you have the same experiences, not quite so dramatic, granted, and you must learn to recognize them in others. Take a typical example. You and I think in patterns. We think in terms of a central motif. I'm going out shopping today. That's the central idea. I think that I shall go to park the car in such and such a place beneath a tree where it's cool, and whilst I'm there, I will go into the bottle store and get a bottle of wine, the drugstore, because I'm having people to dinner tonight. And at the same time, perhaps I can go across the road and get some salad for a meal and so on, and we build up a whole series of thoughts about a central theme. And to all of us, this is perfectly normal. But for the schizophrenic, it's a far different matter altogether. He sets out with this motive. He wants to go shopping. He goes, thinks in terms of this, and says, I'll park the car under the green tree, right next to that barber shop. Must get my hair cut there today. That barber, what a nice man he is, and his wife, such a gentle person. Of course, she's pregnant, and I suppose he's not going to be able to go away for a holiday this year, and the next moment a door bangs, and he's directed towards the door banging. And the door bang, yes, must get in touch with the handyman to get that door repaired. Perhaps it'll have to be replaced. And the next moment something rattles, and his attention is to that. And each time he dramatizes that whole situation, whereas we tend to build up a pattern of logical thought, thinking. So many of you will begin to recognize that some so-called phenomena that you understand are very, very similar to the problems of schizophrenia. Let me give you an excerpt from a story about himself that a schizophrenic started to write. There's a very classical one. It comes from The Mental Hospital by Alfred H. Stanton of 1954, his book published in 1954. So here is a schizophrenic writing down his thoughts about himself. Well, on a balmy and clear day in the month of December, to be exact, December the 10th, 1894, I selected for my dear old mother, Mrs. Barbara Fox, whose maiden name was Wilson, that's all, a wee bit of Scots, methinks, in her parents, probably born in old Scotland, England. Perhaps that's where I inherit my so-called pins or buns, some original, mostly antiques, but dressed in kilties or a new calico wrapper, they sound new to some. It's strange how illiterate many of us are. My father, not having an authenticated data of my ancestry, I'll just say from memory, was born in the state of Virginia, where I revered first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen, and the first but not least president of these wealthy, if not the wealthiest in natural resources at least, nation on the face of the globe, or in other words, the world, named the United States of America, America right or America wrong, America forever, or as is said by some, the Star-Spangled Banner, may her flag ever wave for the brave and the free, or united we stand, but divided we fall, and as Rome fell, we trust God will keep us by his almighty help from ever falling as well, either by his hands, earthquakes, floods, whirlwinds, the end of the world wars, or the history of the United States. We might wisely return to our subject, the life of the writer George Fox. None of that is nonsense. Taken statement by statement, it is quite a logical aspect of thinking, but he has been diverted from his central theme. He gets enthused, and as one thought flashes into his mind, he seizes onto it and energizes it, and then another one, and then another, and he has to constantly bring himself back to the central theme. Now, you may think that is laughable, but let me quote from a book by Virginia Woolf, who is recommended in England to all students of English. Virginia Woolf was one of the modern novelists, and she had a distinctive style. I had to learn about her when I did my English degree. Virginia Woolf. But listen to an excerpt that I took from a book at random. The book, in fact, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. Here it is. It was at Bourton that summer, early in the 90s, when he was so passionately in love with Clarissa. There were a great many people there, laughing and talking, sitting round a table after tea, and the room was bathed in yellow light and full of cigarette smoke. They were talking about a man who had married his housemaid, one of the neighbouring squires. He'd forgotten his name. He had married his housemaid, and she'd been brought to Bourton to call. An awful visit it had been. She was absurdly overdressed like a cockatoo. Clarissa had said, imitating her, and she never stopped talking. On and on she went, on and on. Clarissa imitated her. Then somebody said, Sally Seaton it was, did it make any real difference to one's feelings to know that before they'd married she'd had a baby? In those days, in mixed company, it was a bold thing to say. He could see Clarissa now turning bright pink, somehow contracting and saying, oh, I shall never be able to speak to her again, whereupon the whole party sitting round the tea table seemed to wobble. It was very uncomfortable. Now that is normal. It is part of a classic, an English classic of literature. Do you see now how very easily we can mistake what is rank psychosis for the normal? And more than this, how difficult it is often to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the real disciple on the path and he who is psychotic. Yes, it's a shocking thing to note. You know, we have to tread this path so carefully, and I beg all of you to heed the teachings of ancient wisdom, the teachings of the masters who have trod this path before us, who lay down certain rules and regulations in Bhagavad Gita, in the voice of the silence, at the feet of the master. They lay down certain disciplines for us to practice, so that this path towards the real may not be diverted into the backwaters of mental illness. I must give you an example, an experience from my own life. And may I just say, that when I was a very young man, I began to write the journal Aquarius. We still produce Aquarius, the Journal of the New Age. And I used to write 95% of the material in it. And I used to proclaim quite openly that the material came to me through the voice of a master that I heard inwardly. And when I went to medical school, I never withdrew one atom of what I had said, one note. The medical students in my class and the other classes, and there must have been nearly 500 of them, all knew that Douglas Baker was the editor of a journal that he wrote, and that he says that he gets the material for the journal from a master of the wisdom. No professor of medicine ever regarded me as psychotic or as neurotic even. I was regarded as a perfectly normal person. But I had the strength of personality to stand it, and many individuals do not have it. Listen to one of the sort of traps that can beset a person who treads the path. I'm going to quote from an experience in my own life. As many of you know, I have continuity of consciousness at a physical level. I never lose consciousness in the physical world. And I have not lost consciousness for 12, 14 years. I sleep as normally as anybody, probably better, but I never lose consciousness. And this is an aspect, a quality, which is produced by the integration of Sahasrara, the thousand-petaled lotus. You should read C.W. Leadbeater's book here on the etheric body, where he quotes it. Continuity of consciousness. But of course this implies certain things, and it can be a very difficult state to be in when you are unexperienced in it. For instance, how often don't you and I hear sounds when we're in a half-dream state, and feel things in a half-dream state, and how these aren't incorporated into our dreams? One morning when I was asleep, likely, just before waking, I was fully aware I was in bed, but I was dreaming. My attention, whilst following a dream event, became aware of a dog that had started to bark nearby, not in the dream, but in the street outside. I was following the course of my dream, and at the same time hearing the sound of each bark. Bark, then the dream content. Bark, dream content. I tried to ignore the bark and to return to my dream, to become engrossed in it. I was discussing some medical matter in my dream with friends, when suddenly the bark from outside changed into not bark, but Bob. Bark, Bob, Bob. And in walked a neighbor friend into my dream, Bob, who then joined in the discussion. I paid no more attention to the outer stimulus of that bark. It had now been replaced in my dream by a visual association image, the image of Bob, my neighbor. I had been dreaming, having a medical discussion with friends, and this damn dog down the road was barking, bark, 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 and my attention was being directed from the dream in the inner world to this outer stimulus. And I had to do something about this. What happened was that the bark became acceptable to me in the form of Bob, and it changed into Bob, and in walked Bob into my dream. Now, to the schizophrenic, that is a very, very frequent occurrence. The inability to, as it were, distinguish between what is real and unreal. And for many of us, we deliberately use this in meditation. We take a bark and turn it into a Bob. We take an outer symbol and turn it into something higher, and it lifts us inwards, higher. I'm sure I have said enough about the subject to make you realize that mind has mountains, cliffs of fall, sheer no man fathom. I have watched this weekend, watched you all find heroes, new heroes, watched you pull down idols and put up new ones. And I think that is very, very wonderful and healthy. But do remember that in the end, on the long path towards the real, that it is the disciplines of ancient wisdom that are important, that will carry you across the path from one kingdom to another. Schizophrenics are terribly sensitive to their environment. Help them, seek them out, understand them, treat them. The treatments for schizophrenia have been barbaric in the past. I'm not denying that many modern drugs enable mentally ill people to live in the world. I think they are highly recommendable, never mind their side effects. But there have also been barbaric treatments for schizophrenia. The deliberate lowering of the blood sugar by injections of insulin, causing insulin shocks, have been shown to be completely useless in England and I think even in this country. The use of shock treatment, a barbaric practice. And if you do nothing else as a result of this talk, please go out into the world and campaign against such barbarous treatment of schizophrenia. It makes no difference to them. It helps them not at all, and it affects their subtle vehicle so that it might take many lives to repair the damage done by such stupid treatment. Don't ever lay further burdens on a schizophrenic who comes to you for help, and you will have them come to you for help. Help them to stand their parental criticism, the criticism of their parents. Help them when they become the target of laughter and derision by their employers and others about them. Help them to overcome problems of self-blame. They're terribly susceptible to self-blame, guilt conditions. Help them in every aspect of stress. If they're in poverty, help them. If they lack a job, help them. And that is the way, as it were, to combat such a situation. The years ahead will soon show quite clearly that schizophrenia is linked to certain genes. And when these are identified in an individual, it will be in the future the right of that individual to live a life of less stress than the stress applied to those who are normal. And we will enact laws in the future which will see to it that the schizophrenic is not subjected to the stress that is normally healthy for average individuals until the genetic problem is overcome. Treatment, I offer two treatments. Treatments which you can use. You don't even have to tell anybody. The treatments are both safe. The first is a herbal remedy. You can give it to your children. You can give it to friends who you know to have psychotic episodes. It is given out to the world by the Master Robert Browning. And the herb is slippery elm bark, easily available from any health food store. Slippery elm bark. It is given in a very easy manner. In fact, I hoped to be able to demonstrate that to you now. Richard, do you think you could go up and get the material from Joe that he has been prepared? You take the slippery elm, which is just the shavings of certain elm trees, which you have in North America here. You can buy the material easily from a health food store. You boil it for 15 minutes, about a wad like that in a pint of water, or a big a tablespoon for it, and after 15 minutes boiling, allow it to cool down. It becomes a slippery, slimy emulsion, as it were. This can be drunk at liberty. By that I mean as much of it as you wish. It can be mixed with lemon or honey. It can be made to be a very refreshing drink. It can be used for a variety of conditions. But with regard to schizophrenia, it has the effect of acting on the sympathetic nervous system to produce a stabilizing of these bodies, so that the energy that is normally labile, motile, can hold the bodies together. You can drink it each day, a couple of glasses if you wish. I have tried it out, of course, and I have recommended it to many people, especially people who come to you with fears and distortions, people who talk about astral attacks and psychic self-defense and so on. This is the sort of individual that you can give it to. You don't have to tell them that they're psychotic. You can help them. Never try and treat any schizophrenic without first recommending that he see his doctor. Be covered in this respect. Don't start trying to treat acute conditions of schizophrenia. It can be very, very dangerous. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and let the medical doctor okay it first. Not that you're going to treat him, but let that subject see the doctor. You can adjust from within. And the two methods I suggest are, first of all, the herb that I've given you, and the second one is a method of mental treatment known as the Satipatthana method. And I shall give this particular method when I give my subject of meditation in the next 2 or 3 days. You can, however, look up the Satipatthana method in the meditation book. It is a process whereby you teach the individual to anchor his consciousness to physical objects. Whatever he does, he must observe himself doing it, and the whole process is calculated to stop the individual from having flights of fancy, from his astral body slipping away. He's made progressively to become concerned with what he is doing, even to the extent of the way in which he's breathing and so on. It is a very, very powerful and useful therapy for schizophrenia. Now, I've come to the end of my subject, and I would be happy to fill in the remaining few minutes with questions and answers.